So I am going to speak in English, and hopefully if you can't catch it now, you can catch it. Maybe they'll have subtitles afterwards. Well, first of all, it's hard to believe that it's been 30 years since we made this game. I want to thank you for inviting me here. Marco, thank you very much for inviting me, and Daniela, thank you for making the film, because without that, I wouldn't have been invited. And this is our first time here in Italy, so it's a huge honor. So I will start. And where did it start? So I grew up in the 1950s, 1960s. That was my childhood. I grew up devouring science fiction. I loved it from as soon as I could read or watch science fiction on television or old movies. Some of my favorite authors were Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, H.G. Wells. I had books. My mom said, go out and play. I said, I want to read these books. So I would stay home and, not always, I'd go out too, but this is where my heart was, I believe. Also loved TV shows. Star Trek, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits. I assume at least some of these made it over here. Star Trek probably more than most, just because of the space travel part really caught me. So after high school, I started as an engineering student at UCLA, at University of California in Los Angeles. Took classes like calculus, physics, chemistry, programming in Fortran, and I hated it. I thought I was going to be an engineer. I thought that doing programming would be a lot of fun, and it was just awful. And around that time, I started learning about humanistic psychology. This is what happened after, I think, 1 year at this new school that had opened up recently in Sonoma, California State University at Sonoma. There I got to take classes like psychology of dreaming, parapsychology, hypnosis, Improv 101, where you're actually improvising acting, and mime. And I liked that. That was a lot more fun than the other ones. But this is also where my heart was. It was much closer to the science fiction and the far out stuff that I was interested in. During the time I was at Sonoma, we got to take a field trip to the Stanford Research Institute, or SRI. And I saw my first computer game, which was called Space Wars, on a CRT run by some big mini computers in a back room. And there's something about that just connected. And it was a wow experience. It's like, this is it. This is what I have to do. But they really weren't for the public yet. This is, you still had to be an engineering major, so I kind of put that aside. But then in 1977, a few years later, by then I met my wife, Annie, and we opened up this nonprofit educational computer center in Marin County. And it's called the Marin Computer Center. And you can see there we are. On the far left is me and Annie next to me. We had kids coming in from all over Marin County, all over the Bay Area for field trips, for classes, for birthday parties. We would put a computer on that large projection TV, and that was one of the most popular parts. We had just seen Star Wars, and during the time I was there, I actually programmed, I guess you could call it programmed, my first Star Wars game. And it was called Star Wars Hodge. And we basically just took words from the Star Wars universe and put them into a puzzle where you had to find them. That was about the level of game programming at the time. But you can see that the same year that we opened the computer center was the year that Star Wars came out. So I was very much enamored with it. See the processor technology saw 20 computers we had. There's Annie showing someone how to play chess on the computer. There I am looking over in the upper right corner. Sometime around the same time, elsewhere in Marin County, same county that we were in, there was this company called Lucasfilm. And it was a small privately owned company just north of San Francisco where Marin County is. And as I mentioned, Star Wars had just come out. Hugely successful film. I believe we saw it on like one of the first days it opened and went back a few times to see it over and over again. A few years later, the second film in the trilogy, first trilogy came out, Empire Strikes Back. Around that time, George Lucas realized that it was very expensive and time-consuming to make all these plastic models or models and then destroy them and have to do stop-motion animation where you're moving them through a room. And he thought that, this new thing called computer animation might be something that you could use to advance the art. So this is an example of an image that was done by Information International Incorporated to show what could be done as a computer graphic of an X-Wing. But I think it took weeks to render just one frame, and they still didn't get all the the dirt and the aging and things that George wanted in his chips. So he realized that really wasn't quite time yet. Computers and storage were just too slow and too expensive, but they were clearly getting faster and cheaper. So even though you couldn't do it now with computers, you could do it eventually. So let's find the best computer graphics wizards and start a new division so we'll be ready when the time has come, when the technology catches up to our vision. So the new Lucasfilm Computer Division was born. This is actually a picture of the back of one of my jackets that had Computer Division on it. Elsewhere in Silicon Valley, down south from Lucasfilm and from Marin, there is this other company called Atari. And Atari was, around the same time, 1977, created the Atari 2600 VCS, which stood for Video Computing System, computer system. It was the most popular game system at the time, and it sold around 40 million units during its lifetime, with about maybe 900 different game titles. So this was spring of 1982, Return of the Jedi. The next film was about a year away. George decided to form a group to do high-tech entertainment and something outside of films. And Atari approached Lucas and said, why don't you do games? And we'll give you $1 million to help fund the start of this new organization. They decided the new group would be part of the Lucasfilm Computer Division, and a new organization, or partnership, I should say, was created, Atari Lucasfilm. I ended up being one of the first people hired for this new group, and here's an article from a magazine called Atari Connection. The people on the team at that point were Charlie Kellner, who was an Apple employee number 7 and a huge programming whiz, especially with the 6502 processor, which is what the Atari 800 used. Dave Levine, another game guy. Peter Langston was our general manager, or I guess the head of the group. There's me. Lauren Carpenter was known for figuring out a way to do fractal landscapes. And he was on loan to us for my first game, actually, Restaurant Fractalus. And Gary Winnick was an artist who had worked at Atari, and he came on board also. So what happened to the Lucasfilm Computer Division? I think that was given away in Mateo's film, but does anyone know what happened to the Lucasfilm Computer Division? Just yell it out if you know. Pixar, yes. George sold it to Steve Jobs in 1986 for $10 million, and Pixar was born. So most of the people left. We stayed behind, and after doing several different games, we decided, Ron Gilbert created a new engine. He had been playing a bunch of games from, I guess we consider them to be our competitor, Sierra Online. And after playing a bunch of their games, he kind of came up with a list of things that we shouldn't do. One was don't kill the player. Well, he didn't mean you should never kill the player. He meant don't arbitrarily kill the player. In other words, if you walk into a wall and hit your head, you shouldn't die. Or if you pick up a piece of broken glass and maybe cut yourself, that shouldn't cause you to bleed to death and die. If you walk off a cliff, then yes, you could die. Or if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute, as you could do in Zak, then it'd be an appropriate thing to happen because you're kind of telegraphing this is something that's dangerous. Don't do no arbitrary puzzles. If you have a puzzle in a game that you get stuck on, and you finally hear the solution, and you think, there's no way I would ever have thought of that solution, then that's probably an arbitrary puzzle. It doesn't make any sense. Call it moon logic. It's logic which just doesn't exist in the real world. On the other hand, if you finally hear the solution, you kind of blame yourself because it was so obvious in retrospect, then it's really on you for not having figured it out. And you won't feel so bad for not having got it yourself. No busy work. In other words, you shouldn't have to clean up the bathroom and wash the floors and do all this stuff. If you don't enjoy doing it in real life, you probably wouldn't enjoy doing it in a computer game. And reward intent. So like if you know the player wants to go across the room, don't create barriers. Let them just click and have them go there. And one of the last things was don't guess the parser. Well, most of the adventure games up until this point, you use a parser, which means you type in text. The text has to be parsed out or figured out or broken down by the computer and figure out what you want and then do the action. And unfortunately, there are so many words that could mean the same thing that often the programmer hadn't thought of the word that you're trying to use to do what you really want to do. So if it was, look at the bush, and the programmer might come back and say, there is no bush here, I don't see a bush. Or I don't know what you mean. And the programmer had thought it was a shrub or something, so something similar. So he turned all this into an article in 1989. This is after you've actually done a few games. It's online if you want to look at it at grumpygamer.com, Why Adventure Games Suck, with underlines. So Ron decided to do a new game using all these ideas. And the game was called Maniac Mansion. It turned out to be the first title that we self-published at Lucasfilm Games. And it used SCUM, which stands for Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion, which is a language and a system to make it easier to create adventure games. And some of the features for SCUM are the ability to build sentences by pointing on a verb. In the first iterations, they were actual words on the screen, and an object on the screen to say, like, pick up rock, for example. And you click on the word pick up, and you click on the word rock, and the character would walk to the rock and pick it up. So you don't have to type anything in, no parser. Click where you want the character to go, and the walk there. So instead of having cursor keys and having the character go like this, and then turn this way, have them go like this, and like this way, if you just want them to go across the room, you click where you want them to go, they'll walk around any obstacles and automatically go to where you want them to go. So it just makes it a lot easier. We had cutscenes, which were non-interactive movies that advance the plot. So it kind of shows you something that's happening elsewhere in the universe of the game. So you realize it's moving the story forward even if you weren't in that room, in that location. And then a couple things for programmers to make it easier for us to actually implement the games. One is called multitasking. It just means you have multiple things, multiple scripts or commands or lists of commands that could be running concurrently. You don't have to wait for one to finish for the other to start. They're all kind of running at the same time. And also an easy to understand scripting language, one that you could actually read and kind of get an idea of what's supposed to be happening. So here's an example that I actually made up, but it could have been from a game. So for example, let's say in Zak McKracken, if you open the refrigerator and then you have Zak try to leave the room, leave his house, there's a script that starts which has Zak go back to the refrigerator and close it and then leave. So for example, you might say the command would be walk actor Zak to object refrigerator. He'll walk there. And you have a command that says wait for actor, so you're waiting for the actor to actually get there. Then once he reaches there, it says actor Zak do animation reach, so he'll hold out his arm, wait a second or a frame, then change the state of the refrigerator, so change it from open to closed, and have Zak say a line, I forgot to close the fridge. And that's pretty close to what we did in the game. Here's the cat clock again, we just saw in that video. Here's a sample of how that script might go, where you have a loop, kind of keeps on going over and over and over again. And all it's doing is changing the state between two states, the tail this way and the tail that way, waiting, making a sound, waiting 60 jiffies, which is a second, and then changing state again, and just doing that as a loop. And do we have sound coming into the computer? There should be a low sound effect happening. No sound? There we go. Yay. So to make this happen, all you have to do at every time you enter the room is have a little command that says start script, clock tick. And when you leave the room, it automatically gets killed and stops. So I had just finished working on Maniac Mansion. I was the Scum programmer, when doing most of the scripting for the game. And I wanted to use Scum on my own game. Maniac Mansion was Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick's game, and I felt like, okay, I'd learned this new skill, how to use the language. I knew I wanted to do something new age. That's the stuff I was just really interested in. There was kind of spirituality, psychic, kind of like far out stuff. I talked to our general manager, Steve Arnold, and he said that he knew just the guy, so he put me in touch with a friend of his named David Spangler, who was a spiritual teacher, author, and written a bunch of books on spirituality, and flew me up to meet with David. This is what he looks like now. And we spent about 2 days at his house up in Tacoma, Washington, which was right near Mount Rainier. And we decided to put everything New Age and spiritual into the game, including any crazy stuff we could find. The farther out the theories, the more fun it would be. It didn't care whether it was true. The whole idea was going to be, kind of irreverent and tongue-in-cheek. So I was a little worried at first that he was going to be upset if I tried to make fun of any of this, but he just got right into the play aspect, and he was great to work with. So we had a bunch of different locations. Some of you saw in the video. Stonehenge, Seattle's Mount Rainier, which is where the first UFO sighting was in 1947. Pyramids and Sphinx in Egypt. Mayan ruins. Ancient alien statues. That's where the bird flew in. The ruins of Atlantis, which I'm sure we've all visited at some time or another. The Bermuda Triangle, you just have to take the airplane there and then jump out of the airplane to get to it, which we saw in the movie. And then the face of Mars, which was a huge thing around the time I did the game. This is how it looked in the game. For those who don't know, there were images taken by a NASA satellite or spaceship that went by Mars that really looked like a face. In later missions, They decided that it was just a weirdness of the shadows at the time it went over, and it no longer looked like it. My theory is that they quickly realized they were being photographed, and they went over and covered it up with something else to make it look totally different. We had characters that were unusual. There was the golf-playing witch doctor in Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the floating guru in Kathmandu, Nepal, and then several alien races. So rather than list everything, I want to read this actual letter we got from a fan soon after the game came out. Dear Sir, I am returning this game, Zak McKracken, because I find it quite unsuitable. The excellent game, playability, and graphics further compounds the real problem. The game is saturated with New Age, Satanism, teachings, and concepts. The following are a few that I and others have come across. Eastern religions, meditation, African witchcraft and magic, a medium, a spiritual guru, a religious devotee, a person converts to an Eastern religion, a superior guardian race of ancient ones, one religion over all of time and all the world, communication by aliens through dreams, out-of-body experiences, mind linking with animals, changing of consciousness, mind over matter and teleportation, mental telepathy, mind control by aliens. I not only find these false teachings objectionable, but consider the immersing of them in humor and presenting them as a game very dangerous. Not any of this was mentioned in the advertisements for the game. I implore you to at least make it clear to unaware buyers that this is a New Age game that deals with religion. As a computer consultant and part-time youth pastor, I have an obligation to others in this regard. I will await your response before deciding how to further fulfill my responsibilities to warn others. Reverend Merwin Updike, Altoona, Pennsylvania. So, well, we actually loved the letter because he got it. Other than the intent, he got everything exactly right. I mean, it was clear that he had played the entire game from start to finish and got it all. So we took the letter and published it in our fan magazine and made sure that he reached the world with his news. So the original name for the game, I think, was something like Jason, the news guy. It wasn't Zak McKracken. I finished the game doc, and Jason was a reporter, but he was really a mainstream media newspaper reporter. I mean, he worked for some large newspaper, like the San Francisco Chronicle. And I passed the document around to the other game designers at Lucasfilm, as we always do. We usually get feedback from each other. And Ron Gilbert didn't think it was funny enough. I mean, it was humorous, but it wasn't far enough. I didn't push it far enough. So we ended up doing a small company meeting with the designers and did a brainstorming session, try to push it further out, and came with give the game more of a slight twist. And so we pulled out the Marin telephone book, started looking randomly through different names, and Zak McKracken came up. I think we found a Zak one place and a McKracken somewhere, and they just felt like it was right. We changed his job to writing fake news, a term which I don't think existed back then, at a crappy tabloid newspaper. Came up with the game's title based on what the aliens were doing to us humans, which is making us stupid, mind-bending us, make us more stupid than they were, and that's how we came up with it. And this was a couple-hour meeting. I think all that came. When I went back and looked at the game and the original design doc, it really hadn't changed. It was just kind of twisting it a bit to make it just more wacky. So here's the box. You've already seen this. The artist for this was Steve Purcell, who created the Sam and Max comics. He's now a director at Pixar. He was a co-writer-director on Pixar's Brave and a TV show called Toy Story That Time Forgot. It's a TV movie. Back of the box, Does anyone know who those two scuzzy guys are on the back? Anyone? No? Zoom in a little bit. So that's Matthew Kane on the left. He will be joining us soon from San Francisco. And that's me on the right. And I usually don't, and we're both wearing nose glasses and hats. I usually don't have a beard, but I had the brilliant inspiration that if I didn't shave for 9 months, that I could save maybe 5 minutes a day. And over 9 months, I got back 16 hours. So that was probably 2 or 3 days that the game shipped earlier. It was really good. And then I ended up going on a vacation, and that's when I did the shaving. It was good. It's great. We packed out a newspaper, example of the National Inquisitor, and it was partially a value-added component, so to prevent people from pirating the game. So they actually got this full, this large newspaper, but it also had a lot of information in it, which acted as hints on various things. We didn't give away the puzzle, but there were things that were pointing to things you might want to do in the game. I didn't create this. This was done by our marketing group. They did a brilliant job. So here's a little video. Some of this you've seen. Notice that the lines are very similar in the movie. But boss, I'll never win a Pulitzer working for this sleazy tabloid. I'm sick of making up stupid stories that make up stories that aren't stupid. Look, just do this last feature, and then you can write your own novel. Here's your ticket to Seattle. Want more on that vicious two-headed squirrel that's been attacking campers? All right. And while you're there, the first UFO sighting happened on Mount Rainier 50 years ago. Write it up, too. Tabloid reporter strangles boss over lousy assignment. What was that? Nothing, boss. And then he goes to sleep. Later that night, Zak's in bed alone again. So sad. Now this is the Commodore 64 version, the very original version. I spent several weeks trying to get the timing of all the interactions to match the sound and the music that Matthew Kane wrote. Seriously, right on the beat. Wow, what a game. So this is the CGA, this is the EGA version, second version for PC, 16 colors. Then we did it again for the FM Towns, it's 256 colors. Here's an example of a cutscene. First time we get to meet the aliens who happen to live downstairs from Zak. This example of switching characters. I'm getting a little tired of waiting. Yeah, this place it's got a great beach, but no sand and no boys. You should have gone to Fort Lauderdale. Okay, that's enough. So, thank you. Well, while researching this or putting this together, so much easier than it used to be. Last time I gave a talk like this 14 years ago, I could just go on YouTube and download complete playthroughs that fans create and then put up on YouTube. And I was horrified when I realized that the only version that had the sound, music, and the animation correct was the US version of the Commodore 64. Every other version, everything got messed up. No one really cared when they did the conversions to have it match. The Europe version, since your clocks or everything runs at 50 hertz instead of 60 hertz, everything was about 20% slower, so the music just didn't match. So I went to actually the original C64 version. There I am. This is probably around the time I just finished the game, and I'm still wearing the t-shirt, you see. Proud to say that it still mostly fits, as long as I do this a little bit. I wanted to read a couple of, I went on social media, and I was asking people on Twitter and Facebook and other places, I guess the Thimbleweed Park Forum, if they could remember anything about having played the game when they were young. And I got dozens and dozens of these, and I'm sorry I couldn't include them all because they're all just brilliant. So I'll read a few of them. This is from Soon Marcher from Twitter. I made this walkthrough when I played it on my C64. It ended mid-sentence, somewhere around Pick Up White Crystal. And you can see him as a kid having written this entire book that he saved. I should have dated the darn thing. I guess it was about 25 years ago, so I was about 10 or 12 years old. Maniac Mansion, Zach, Boom, Monkey Island, they all contributed to me learning English. And I heard this from a lot of people that, before we had the translated versions in new languages, people didn't want to wait, so they just grabbed the game and they taught themselves English by having to solve it. This is from our friend Zak McKracken. Hey. First time I was a teen, I had played Maniac Mansion, liked it, but I was disappointed for not having finished it without hints. So I wanted to play Zak entirely by myself without any help. It took me 3 months, but I did it. Satisfactory. I had played Zak with my cousins 30 years ago, and now I have shown it to a teen I know. This is from Robbie Crossfeld, Segrax on Twitter. I used to play it with my mom during the school holidays back in 92, 93. You can see it here on our Amiga in Amiga 2000 during our house renovations. And you can see it on the screen there. There's the kid when he was a kid. Every time I think of Zak, I smell the scent of roast chicken. I picture myself as a 13-year-old unpacking a colorful box I had just retrieved from the local post office near our summer home. I unwrapped the package, I examined the back cover, I saw you and Matt, the in-game screens, and I smelled it. I was right outside the deli where my mother was buying lunch. They were roasting chickens, and the scent wafted through a vent I was under. I was mesmerized by the game when 2 hours later, I put the floppies in my 1541 drive and ran the game on my C64. And yet, above all, that scent has been imprinted into my memory of Zak. I'm now 41. Some days ago, I was in the same little town. Guess what? The deli is still there, and it still roasts chickens. Passing under the vent, I smelled the scent, and again I went, "Oh my God, Zak!" without even thinking. This is from Sigma Jump. I played Zak with my dad on the C64 when I was still in single digits. He helped me walk through stuff because he knew the game back and front. Just last year, I got him Zak from GOG.com, which, by the way, you can now get it legally for all those who've pirated the game before. It's like $5 or $6, €5 probably. This time, I had to walk him through things because I'd recently played and he'd forgotten. So I loved that. I've heard this from a lot of different people where they had memories of playing with a brother or a father, and then at some point they play the same game with their kids or with their brother again, and just really bonding experience for them. I played Zak. This is from YRFACE, Your Face. I played Zak as a kid in 1989 on our C64. My older brother and I loved Maniac Mansion, and even my mom didn't seem to mind it as much as the other video games we played. So she bought us Zak McKracken, and we were so excited to have another Lucasfilm game. We got stuck a lot, but it was fun to try a bunch of things and then come back to it the next day after thinking of a bunch of ideas. My brother has since passed away, but replaying Zak now brings back some really great memories of playing as kids and discovering it together. Fast forward, and I get to share the experience with my son, who is totally into playing Zak with me and also loves Thimbleweed Park. It's been a real treat that Thimbleweed Park opened these doors for us. And for those who don't know, that's a game that Ron Gilbert, Gary Winnick, and I worked on, finished about a year ago, year and a half ago it came out. And very similar to the point-and-click games we created way back in the late 80s and early 90s. So let me go through, I have a few minutes left, a few in-jokes that appear in Zak and other games. In Maniac Mansion, there's this chainsaw, and this is our first point-and-click or graphic adventure. And Ron didn't know that you shouldn't be putting a bunch of things in the game that had absolutely no use. And so there's a chainsaw on the wall there in the kitchen. It's a kitchen tool. Lots of blood on the wall, which we later find out is ketchup. And if you pick it up, which you can, and look at it, it says, I think it's out of gas. Well, you can't use it anywhere in the game. There's no gas in the game. It became a huge, we call it a red herring. It's something which people look forever for, could never find it. And some people were angry at us for doing that because they wasted so much time trying to figure out what to do with the chainsaw, which had no use other than being a gag. So in Zak McKracken, I figured I'd carry it one step further, and notice there's the youth hostel or the hostel on Mars, and there in one of the cabinets, used for chainsaw gas only. Sorry, used for chainsaws only. It's a gas of chainsaw gas. I don't need it. It's for a different game. In each of the games, we would put posters from all the other titles we had done. And depending on when the game came out, the posters would be different. So this is the later version of the 256 color Zak. So there is a poster of Maniac Mansion, which had already been out. But in the second version of Maniac Mansion, which was a PC version, there's a poster of Zak. And if you look at it, it says Zak McKracken and the Alien Mindbenders. What a great game. I never did figure out what to do with the can of gas on Mars. There's a poster in the Caponians layer of Rescue on Fractalus, which is my first game. But in a later version, we changed it to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which was the game that came after Zak that we did. We have this jail, which we also doubled as the pirate jail. I mean, we had copy protection with the game, and you had to enter a code that came on a separate piece of paper that was really, really hard to photocopy. It was like dark ink on dark, dark red paper, so you really couldn't put it on a machine and copy it very easily. That was to make sure people didn't pirate the game, at least not easily. So if you miss the code 5 times in a row, you get sent to pirate jail and get locked up, and the guy lectures you about pirating games. Anyway, there on the wall is a poster, and if you say read wanted poster, it says, I can't read the words, but there's a photo of a meteor on it, and that's from Maniac Mansion. Here's, again, back in the Caponians room. There are 2 Easter eggs right there on the screen. First one is that pink thing, which is a rotofoil from one of our first 2 games, Ball Blazer. It's the vehicle that you move around in. And on the door, it says secret door, and it's spelled S-E-K-R-I-T, which is not right. And that's a throwback to a door with a similar spelling in Maniac Mansion. At Skywalker Ranch, the address is 5858 Lucas Valley Road. Total coincidence that it's called Lucas Valley Road. It was named that before George was born, and I don't know if he chose this location because the road was already Lucas Valley Road, or it's just a coincidence. Anyway, that number shows up right there at Zak's apartment, or his house, his flat where he lives, 5858 in San Francisco. And in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, we put a lot of Easter eggs in this one, and a bunch of them from Zak. First is a totem pole from Sam and Max. Steve Purcell mentioned was the cover artist. Below that, there is a stone tablet warning about aliens in disguise, which is a Zak reference. There's an African shaman's mask, which is another Zak reference. It says it's a crystal shard, and below it says, it's just a chunk of crystal I found in a Mayan temple. It's of no use to me, but some flakes in San Francisco want it. And this is the inspiration for that bit in the movie we just saw with the letter. What? Some flakes, yes. Sankara stones, those were in Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom. Here's a statue of a falcon, but it actually says statue of a 1,000-year-old falcon. And of course, we know that means Millennium Falcon, which is Han Solo's ship in Star Wars. A map drawn in crayons, which was another Zak reference. And a fragment of a meteor oozing purple slime, which was another Maniac Mansion reference. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So, are we Skyping with Matthew?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Are we answering questions first and then bringing Matthew in, or are we bring him in now? Marco.
Perché abbiamo in programma una chiacchierata su Skype con il compositore del gioco, con il compositore delle musiche di Zak McKracken, ma avremo anche un momento per fare domande a David, cosa che vi avviso è molto bello fare perché David dà sempre delle risposte molto interessanti. Cosa facciamo quindi prima? Facciamo prima le domande o prima il... what would you like to do first?
Well, we could maybe spend a few minutes on questions first, and then let Matthew come in, and we could open it up for him too.
Perfect.
And if there's a question which is a Matthew question,
we will just bring him in. Ok, quindi cominciamo con le domande. Mi era stato detto che avremmo avuto una valletta o un valletto con un microfono nel pubblico, quindi se volete fare domande in inglese potete farlo, se volete parlare in italiano tradurrò io per voi la domanda a David. Abbiamo un vincitore.
Hi. The question I'm going to make is basically what I was telling you earlier about copy protection. Well, what were your expectation against, like power groups cracking them, first of all? If you were like, do you remember I asked you if you knew they were that hard? And, and what also was the reaction when you saw the game cracked?
Well, we knew that it was...
Can I translate? Ho fondamentalmente chiesto, siccome si ragionava prima delle protezioni sui giochi, se sapevano che erano abbastanza difficili da craccare, perché è un interprete, quindi vabbè, non mi sto a dilungare, erano molto difficili da craccare. E eventualmente poi quali erano le reazioni quando vedevano i giochi alla fine erano stati craccati.
Okay, so with our first two games that we did, Rescue on Practice and Ball Blazer, those got pirated and put on BBS systems, message boards, where you could download games pretty much a year before the games came out. And it wasn't expected that, but they were an earlier version. We aren't sure exactly how it happened. It coincidentally, maybe, was a week after we delivered diskettes to Atari for them to look at it for marketing. But we didn't do any kind of serialization on the discs, so we couldn't really prove who did it, because we gave them to a couple other people too. And it's pretty upsetting, because most people who know the games know them by their pirated titles, which were either Rescue Mission or Behind Jaggy Lines and Ball Blaster. So after that, we were less naive, and we tried to do protection on everything we did, knowing that they would get cracked probably within a day or two of when we released the games. So it wasn't that we didn't think it would happen. We just wanted to make it more difficult for people to copy them and pass them around.
But were you aware that since you were like using an interpreter, like SCUM in this case, it was actually not a simple like compare, and a jump, because it wasn't that. Were you aware of that?
Well, I personally wasn't, because it wasn't my area. It was probably Ron Gilbert who did the protection. I know that he did a bunch of stuff to the code after we were done with it to make it much harder to actually read. He did a rotate 13 or whatever it is called on it, or something equivalent to make it harder. But we knew that it would happen at some point. It was just mostly to make it less likely that the average person could do it.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
What was the reaction when you actually saw them? I mean, the point is,
when we knew it was going to happen. So it wasn't, oh my God, it happened. We thought it was like, okay, maybe we'll get a day or two or a week before it happens, and by then enough people stores will have purchased it, and we'll get some sales. And the other part we did with all of the games was, like I showed you the newspaper, we put pack-in stuff to make it valuable to have the game with the box and all that stuff in there, stuff which enriched the experience of the game. So if you went off and got a pirated version, you lost out. You didn't get the full experience. In Maniac Mansion, there was a poster, I think, a bulletin board. In Zak, there was that newsletter. In Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, there was the Grail Diary, which actually had critical information you had to have in order to complete the game. And we tried to tie it in with the game so that it didn't feel like a tacked-on piece of copy protection that was actually part of the experience of playing it. That worked best, I think.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Abbiamo qualcuno di lì?
I have a question about when you decided to program SCUM, and basically you had a list of things you wanted to avoid having in the next adventure game. Now that you've done more adventure games since Zak, what would you add to that list?
Well, I think that when we did Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade was the one after Zak, and we got a little better, except with that one we actually wanted to see if we can kill Indy. So that was something we felt like, here's a guy who's supposed to be living dangerously. If you made it completely impossible for him to die, it would just not feel real. So we had a meeting with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg before we started working on the game, and asked specifically, could we kill Indy in the game, making sure they wouldn't be upset if we did that. And they said, yeah. Steven said, sure, kill him. It's okay. I don't care. And so But we didn't do it needlessly. It was telegraphed. I mean, we made sure you knew you're walking into a dangerous situation. One place where you could die as Indy, for example, was if you slugged Hitler in the face and someone machine gunned you after that. And, you got the benefit of doing that, but you knew you were going to die. Other things that I think most of the things we learned, we tried to put into use in Thimbleweed Park, the game that just came out. Things like no dead ends. Don't want to have the player get into a situation where it's completely unwinnable, or getting partway through the game or near the end and realizing there was something that happened in the first part of the game which you didn't do, which caused you to make it impossible to complete. That's definitely the case with Zak. I mean, there are several places where you could be in an unwinnable situation and the game didn't know it. I didn't program that for a tell, and the player didn't know it, and it's very frustrating for them to go on and realize it was impossible. So that was a huge thing we learned. Things, just modern interface stuff, making it easier to move one place to another, fast walking in Thimbleweed Park, so rather than being stuck at the same speed, you could like that. Adding maps for once you traverse something a couple of times, you can jump there fast. So all those things were just making it easier on the player and less tedious to make it fun. So it's really focusing more on story, characters, and also the audience is different now than back then. And back then, we didn't have internet. People were willing to spend way more time beating their head against the computer trying to figure out how to do a puzzle. Now they want fast action, have it go really, really fast. So in the Thimbleweed Park, we added a hint system built into the game, where with Zak, you actually had to call up a phone number and you got charged like $1 a minute for hints. Now it's in the game for Thimbleweed Park. Ways to track where you are, so rather than having to have all those notes that your girlfriend took, where are you? And we have a whole list of to-do lists for each character at Thimbleweed Park, so they can keep track of where you are, what you have to remember, what you're supposed to be doing next. So just making it easier for the player who isn't that dedicated or has that much patience or time. Plus an easy mode and a hard mode and a few other things like that.
Ok, vediamo qualche altra domanda. Non fate i timidi. Qualcuno ha chiesto a Siri di fare una domanda. Qualcuno ha fatto una domanda a Siri. Potete fare le domande direttamente a David Fox invece che a Siri.
What was that?
That was a phone assistant triggering. I do have a question for you. Who was behind the hotlines, the hint lines back in the day? Because in Italy, we never saw them. We just had magazines with guides to the games and solutions. But we couldn't afford to call the US to get hints. But so what were they like?
I believe that we kept on getting letters and phone calls to our tech support group asking for help. And I think we realized that we could monetize it. We could find a way to get some money back from that. So we both created a hint book you could purchase for a few dollars. But also, essentially, I think a mechanical telephone tree where you can say, I'm stuck in different parts of the game, and you kind of go down a tree of questions like any tree you have now.
So was it automated?
It was automated, yeah.
Okay.
So first we did it by hand. We had people actually talk, and then we ended up doing a recording system with a computer. I think it was a computer with all the things recorded as audio.
Because I've always pictured it like it was on Monkey Island
right.
too,
Well, probably,
with a lady, just with polite lady telling you.
I think it was that way first until we knew all the questions that were coming in, and then we put it into a computer.
Perfetto. Qualcuno? Ecco, sentiamo.
I wonder about how did you get in touch with the guys who made the fan-made sequel, Zak McKracken and the Between Time and Space. I do remember I've played only recently because only recently it came out as an English with an English dub. So I was wondering about your involvement because I do remember you were involved at some stage, at least in the, let's say, saying that you were happy about it. But
Yeah,
I was
well, I never.
wondering if they did get in contact.
Sure. Well, I never played any of the fan-made sequels. I was honored to know that mostly people in Germany, I think all of them came from Germany, were so enthusiastic about the game and they wanted a sequel so badly that they made one themselves. That showed how much they loved it, so I thought that was great. But I didn't want to actually play them. Partly I have a Mac, so technically there was an issue. But also, in case there ever was a sequel, which I didn't expect there to be, but if there was and I was involved, I don't want to have to worry about pulling an idea from them rather than from myself. There was one of those where they asked us, I think they must have gotten in touch with me through my website. They asked us if we record a couple of segments of something. So Annie, my wife, and myself and Matthew got together and recorded some audio and gave it to them. But that was my involvement. I never saw the game, I never saw the design, and we just, as a kind of a something to be nice and have fun with it, we said, sure, we could do that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Domande? Eccola lì.
Io parlerò in italiano.
E io tradurrò per te,
Ok.
non ti preoccupare.
Purtroppo la notizia di oggi che Telltales Game, che è una ditta che appunto faceva giochi adventure, ha chiuso perché non aveva abbastanza introiti per portare avanti i suoi lavori. La domanda che volevo porre è se secondo David ci potrebbe essere adesso una produzione di alto livello appunto sui genere punta e clicca che possa aver successo, insomma, non un indie o comunque una produzione di basso target. Quindi se secondo voi nel mercato moderno potrebbe funzionare una cosa simile appunto ai vari punti e clicca del passato.
Okay, today or yesterday we got the news that Telltale was shut down, and he is wondering if, in your opinion, it's possible to achieve success with a point-and-click game with a AAA scope, not with an indie scope, like to make a AAA adventure game and be profitable.
Okay, so for those who don't know, Telltale Games was a company that was mostly founded by ex-LucasArts employees, and they ended up getting licenses for a bunch of the LucasArts earlier titles. They had a Monkey Island series. They did I think they're best known for the Walking Dead series and a few other games. And we just heard that they let go 90% of their team yesterday, and have left maybe 25 left over to finish up the Walking Dead series they're working on. So that's a good question. They took the user interface with all the verbs, and it had been simplified over the years to like a coin interface and other simplifications, to the point where there weren't a lot of choice points in their games. I don't know if that was, since I really I've played one or two of their games, I don't know them really well. I think that was to accommodate the current audience they perceived they had. And they also did short games. They were serialized, so you could buy, short, one or two
Seasons,
copies.
basically.
Right, like a TV show series. I know that what I heard was that in 2004, I believe, that's around the time that LucasArts closed a couple of graphic adventures that were in progress. And my understanding of what happened to it was that the cost at the time for creating them was going like this. The audience was going like this. So the audience really wasn't growing, but the cost was. So at some point, the difference didn't make any sense. They weren't getting enough return on the investment. So they were doing, I think they were essentially AAA. They were putting a lot of energy into animation, into voice acting, into everything. It made it expensive, and the animation made it really expensive. So they just saw it wasn't a good business for them to be in, and they just decided to focus on Star Wars type games instead. So I think that the audience really is a finite audience, especially ones who played our games way back and have recollection. For Thimbleweed Park, it was a Kickstarter. It was funded by the crowds, and 18,000 people gave us money to make this game. But and it did really well afterwards from people besides that. So, but the budget was relatively small. It was like $1 million budget compared to like a AAA title where you might have.
Yeah, no, a AAA title would be in
50, 100
the
million,
tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah.
So I don't think you can make.
You can do several Thimbleweed Parks with one Assassin's Creed, I guess.
Hundreds. But I don't think you get your money back because I don't think the audience is large enough for that to happen. At least where most of the people are. So I would say the answer is no. Short answer.
Domande? Ce ne sono, partiamo da là, partiamo da sinistra verso destra.
Do you prefer old games or new games?
Can you say that again?
Do you prefer old games or new games?
You mean to play? I'll say something which might be a little embarrassing. I'm not a huge gamer. My form of entertainment is to make games, and I'll play them. Sometimes I'll get hooked into a game enough to play through, but usually I'm more like the chef who goes into the restaurant and does a taste to see whether it's good or not, and say, yes, that's good. And part of it is because I'm so critical that it's hard for me to get into a game without, coming up with all these reasons of how it could be better, which is true for every game. Every game could be better. Partly, if I liked it enough, I know my personality enough that I probably would spend way, way too much time doing it. So as an addictive type personality in that area, I'd say, no, I just put it aside. But I truly get more fun creating the game and then watching people play it than doing it myself. And of course, I can't have fun playing my own game. That doesn't happen. So, but I'll make the kind of game that I would like to play if it were like that. But there are the ones I played were more older games. So more recently, I haven't played that much. Sorry.
Avevamo altre domande? Passiamo di qua.
Should we bring Matthew in?
Oh yeah, chiamiamo Matthew su Skype. Oh, è già lì. It's already there.
Hello, Matthew.
Welcome.
Well, hello, David.
So we have.
There's a delay, so it might be hard to talk.
Yeah, there's like a 2 to 3 second delay. So when you say something.
There's a delay.
Yes, it's going far away.
Well, it's because he is far away, so it's kind of like.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Yay, you found it. Yay.
It was very deep in my basement.
So we just.
I just want to say quickly, thank you.
Say that again?
It's an amazing honor.
Thanks for being with us.
Okay, I'll be quiet now, David.
Actually, I have a question for you. What did you use to compose the original theme song on the Commodore 64?
Oh, great. Well, I was first of all amazed. I loved the film. Thank you. It's incredible. And for those of you who just saw it, the music at the end of the film, over the credits, is actually the first version of the theme song I did. And that was done on a Yamaha DX7
Yes.
a Roland Juno 106, which you can see behind me over there. Still have it.
That's the good stuff.
Roland. Sorry?
That's the good stuff.
Yes. It's still working after all these years. And but then taking that piece of music and translating it onto the Commodore 64 was very tedious. Though I still think the Commodore 64
Did you have something
is the best version of the song.
Okay.
I agree.
Matthew, did you have something set up where you could use the Commodore 64 as a MIDI instrument, that you were streaming the sound from your computer into it, playing the music? No.
No. It was, the Commodore 64 did not do MIDI at that time. So I actually had to recreate it in code on the Commodore 64, which was a challenge. And for those of you who ever played the IBM version, by the way, I just have to say that is the absolute worst version of the music ever done. Because it just is beep, 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 beep.
Yeah, the first time I played Zak was with the PC speaker, with the beeper. And yeah, it was kind of harsh.
I'm sorry.
It's not your fault, it's the beeper's fault.
So after I came back, I didn't tell this story before. After I spent 2 or 3 months coming up with a game design, after I had my meeting with David Spangler, I realized that the scope of the game was just way too much for me to be able to do for myself. So I asked Steve Arnold if there was someone who could help me do it, and he said, well, maybe Matthew, because Matthew was already working within the company, but with the learning group, Lucasfilm Learning. And we asked, and I remember you saying, yes, you would do it. And we kind of split up the game into different sections. And at this point, I could not tell you which parts we did and he did, I did and he did, other than I think the style kind of melded. I mean, he said stuff with his type of humor, and I did stuff, and we kind of ended up coming together and having it be pretty consistent across. Although someone asked me yesterday where the words Lorfic came from.
I wish I knew. I wish it may have been you.
I think it was you.
It may have been me. So one of the things that's happened is I think our memories have been merged. David and I remember doing, I think he did a part, he thinks I did a part. We worked so well together. It's still 30 years later, the best collaboration I was ever involved with.
Hey.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful we've remained also very good friends all these years. It was a bonding experience and something that we really still enjoy being a part of.
Yes. We go walking with our dogs in the woods.
Our dogs look very much alike.
Is there anything, I ask you a question, is there anything that you remember as a highlight in the creation of the game? For me, it's
the whole experience.
Yeah, it's like a good feeling.
I think I've had a wonderful career before that game and after that game, but there's something so special about Zak. Both David and I poured our hearts into it. We were at the ranch working on it probably 12 to 16 hours every day. We often would nap there and keep working on it. it was absolutely a labor of love, and it shows. The fact that people are still like you showing up to honor this game is incredible 30 years later, and gives me goosebumps, which I have right now. You can't see, but my arm is all full of bumps.
When you say the ranch, you are talking about the Skywalker Ranch, correct?
Yes, yes. When I started working with Lucasfilm, it was doing educational software, and we were at a place called Kerner, which was an industrial park in San Rafael, which is also in Marin County, California. But a little bit before starting Zak, the whole games division moved out to Skywalker Ranch, and it was an incredibly creative environment. We'd sit in our offices, and mountain lions would walk by outside, and rattlesnakes would slither by in the yard, and you could take hikes and eat some of the best food I've ever had were the lunches we were served. But they gave us an environment where we could really be creative and experimental, and I'm forever grateful for that.
I remember often, because the ranch was so far away from everything else, I think the nearest restaurant was a good 20, 25-minute drive away. You pretty much were stuck there for the day. But they did feed us really well, but they didn't have any kitchens open after lunch. So I remember when we were moving into crunch period, I would get a huge plate of food and eat half of it there, take the rest back to my office, then heat it up for dinner, and then drive back home, after dark at 10 o'clock or something. And I don't know if that's where I gained like 5 or 10 pounds during that project. It really was good food.
A lot of food.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great time, and it's something that at this age of my life, it would be probably difficult to recreate. Those late nights over and over again.
Yeah. So do you want to
Avete delle domande per David o per Matthew? Sentiamo. Microfono.
Actually, a question for both. You were talking about developing, but what were the developing tools that you were using? You said you developed in 64, right? The first, version of Zak McKracken, right? So how was the development, on a such a tiny machine? What would how was the whole project go? You were working you said, you on one part, you on another part. How would you merge that? Because I'm thinking about GitHub and tools today, right? And how was, developing a game on such a complex game on the Commodore 64 code side,
Right. Yeah, I can answer that. So we ended up, we all had Sun Microsystem microcomputers on our desks, and these are really large screen computers. Used Emacs as the text editor on the Sun system. I pushed a button, it would compile the code and stream it down to a floppy disk attached to the Commodore 64. Then I could start up the game at that point. And I think sometimes you could issue commands from the Sun directly to the Commodore 64 to check some things. But it was pretty tedious. I mean, there was a long delay still because you had to send it out through, I don't know if it was a parallel port or serial port, to then load it onto the hard drive, the floppy disk drive, and then play it.
Did you have to write the floppy and take the floppy to a 64?
Well, the floppy was written on the 64, so the code would go into the Commodore 64 from the Sun workstation, and then onto the disk, and then we could run it on the Commodore 64.
Did you guys do that system, or was normal thing for developers?
No, we did that. Yeah. We
did that
grew over all the tools we used for. I mean, most people would just develop on the Commodore 64 directly, which was probably even harder. But because we had the Suns were using Unix, we had all the Unix tool sets and diff and everything else we needed to compare files and text files really fast, and everything was archived on hard drives, away from the computers every night. I guess to merge, and we would generally be working on different parts of the game, and then on a regular basis, I believe we just, okay, let's merge our files, and I could tell which files were touched, and Usually it was just bringing them in. Sometimes you had to do a few things, that, add new variables and all that. But it wasn't horrendous. For the next game after Zak, so that was for both Zak and Maniac Mansion. For Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, we didn't do a Commodore 64 version. Development was on. By then, PCs have gotten powerful enough. So all development and debugging and everything was done on a PC with two screens, separate screen for debugging and the game screen. And that made things way, way, way faster. So that was good. That was probably one of the reasons we chose not to do the Commodore 64 version for Indy, was because we were on a really, really tight deadline, and all that extra Commodore 64 stuff just took forever.
It could have run on the 64?
Maybe, but to get it to work would have taken longer too, and we had 6 months to do a game that would usually take 9 to 12 months. So we're trying to find all the ways we could streamline the process for that game.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Altre domande? Eccolo lì, alla tua sinistra, ecco, perfetto.
I have another question, which is, on this kind of game, how much time do you spend on writing the sort of ideas and the script of what's going to happen in the story versus actually programming the code and making sure that all the images and all that work properly?
Well, this is my recollection, was that on this game, I took about 2 or 3 months to create the design, but the design was pretty sketchy. It was like, here are the characters, here are the objects, here's the locations. I created a chart using a project planning software so you can kind of see the flow of objects you needed, which puzzles had to be solved in order for other things. We call it a dependency chart. And by the time that Matthew came on, that was done, but the level of design was kind of up here, more like general, and the actual things like, what do you call that object? What's the dialogue? Things like actually creating the room, getting the art from the artist and setting up the room, wiring it up, we called it. And all the cutscenes, none of those were scripted ahead of time. We did those on the fly. The game changed on the fly because the level of detail wasn't really high. And we'd come into areas where we say, well, hey, we never thought of this. What do we do with this problem? And when that came up, it was great to have each other to bounce the thing off of and kind of come up with a solution, brainstorm a bit on the fly, and come up with a solution that would work, and then implement it. So it's kind of improv with somewhat of a script, is the way I would describe it. It was really free-flowing design. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd also like to add, David mentioned the language Ron wrote, Scum. And the amazing thing about Scum was it was really more like, and he showed you examples, but it was more like writing a movie script than it was writing computer code, and allowed you to sort of just write what came into your mind. And you could even read the code and see what was happening. It read just like a script. I used to take printouts home, and my girlfriend at the time was Leslie, who is one of the girls on Mars, by the way. And she would read the code and could laugh at the jokes, which she knew nothing about programming. But it was, what Ron built was brilliant because it gave you, as a creative person, a way to create and improvise and change things so quickly. And I've never enjoyed coding as much.
Well, mentioning Leslie, on the Commodore 64 version, I'm not sure if we did that later, Leslie was also one of our play testers, or bug testers, and she kept on coming in with different colored hair, like every week or so. So that became a running gag with the character in the game, where every time you took off her helmet, it would be a different color. And that was more like really an in-joke for us, but I guess people appreciated it. The other co-ed, his name was Melissa, which was Ron's girlfriend at the time. And she was in China, so that's how she got the name Alyssa China. I think she was studying Chinese and getting a doctorate or something in that. So all of us got a significant other in there. Of course, people got that my wife's maiden name was Annie Laris, and so that became the name as the character in the game. Another Easter egg.
Exactly how many girlfriends were in the Lucas games? Because
I think Sandy might have been someone that Ron liked. I should say that publicly or not, but
in Maniac Mansion.
Yeah, that was usually Maniac Mansion. Razor, I think I know who it's based on, but I'm not going to say. Same thing for most of the other characters. Most characters are based or inspired by someone we knew, and most of that we keep very secret. But yeah, it's inspiration and gives you someone to picture as you're writing dialogue and personality. So.
Also, you can say, yeah, look, I put you in a game.
Yes. As long as
you'll be there forever.
I bet you, Annie, you never expected you'd be in this situation because of that.
Avete altre domande? Vai.
You mentioned about this 64 version, which runs in sync, is the only one, the US one, for the 60 years. But besides that aspect, which version is your favorite and for what reason?
Okay, I didn't quite get that.
Non ho capito neanche io.
Sorry.
Scandisci.
Because it's so strange to hear me in loudspeaker. And he mentioned about the version, the Commodore 64 US version, which is the only one that has the good sync for sound.
Okay.
But besides that aspect, which one is your favorite version?
Okay. So which ones, basically, which of the versions? I think there were three primary art versions. The Commodore 64 first, which we developed, and that's where I spent all that time in the title sequence to get it to match with Matthew's great music. And I discovered, I don't know if you heard this, Matthew, but I discovered while pulling up videos from YouTube, that's the only version that everything's in sync for the action and the sound on the beats and the changes. No one else was crazy enough to put weeks of time to get that perfect. So that's me. The other changes, most other stuff wasn't that significant. I think the EGA version, the EGA version is probably my favorite. The art, I think I was still involved enough to have some art direction over it. There was still a lot of limitations to the number of colors we could use, but I think I think it might have been some of the same artists who worked on the Commodore version took it over, and so they took their inner version, their inner idea of what it should be, and just made it look better. The VGA or 256 or FM Towns version, I pretty much wasn't involved at all, and I think there is a situation where this is probably the first game that these guys had done that had 256 colors, and they went crazy. And I think in some ways, some of the scenes I think are maybe overdrawn or oversaturated or a little bit too crazy, and I probably would not have gone that direction. I mean, I like it still, but it doesn't. I don't have the connection to it that I do with the other one.
And I'd like to add, if I might, that the Commodore 64 version was really the one David and I, that's where it was created. We polished it and focused on it and loved it and cared for it. And the other versions, well, there was some involvement. It wasn't like our baby that we took such good care of to deliver. So the Commodore 64 is definitely my favorite all the way around.
I agree. Domande?
Since let's say, now that you have the experience of recreating a similar game after many years, I'm talking about Thimbleweed Park, have you any, let's say, good tools to share for people who are on the same journey? I mean, specifically about writing. Because I wonder, okay, as a developer, it's easy to think about Slack or GitHub or maybe Google Docs, but I wonder if, especially for writing, since you were 3 writers, if I'm not wrong, or more like that, I wonder how did you share your, let's say, dialogue lines? If it was more like I just put this in the build and Ron maybe will give the final tick if it was okay or not, or if you have something else.
Yes, so there were probably 4 writers on it. There were Ron, myself, and Jen.
Lauren.
And then Lauren did a lot of the dialogues. And so she did, the first 3 of us were programmers, so we actually wrote them and coded them at the same time, where Lauren would get the information that Ron wanted. Often he would give her essentially a really rough template of what he wanted to happen in this dialogue, which is very different than the other type of scripts. And she'd do it, then she'd give it back to him, he'd edit it, and maybe send it back to her. So this part's too long, cut it back. Then he would implement it in the code. And then for everything, like I would check Ron's work. Ron admits that he's not a great speller, and so I'd be looking for stuff, and we all make typos. But I would use Ron's his sense for each character, the way he wrote them, as the guide. So he would usually take the first pass on the major characters at least. And when I had to write lines for the character, I would just try to match that same tone. But then he would take it back, and sometimes he'd, make it a little more crass than I was doing it, to make I was being too polite, especially with Ransom. And we have this clown that has a pretty bad mouth. And as far as tools, the main editing tool is BB Edit, which is really the programming tool. And I'm assuming that Lauren probably just wrote in Microsoft Word or some other thing, and then we just brought it over into BB Edit, which is just a text editor, straight text editor. Other tools, Slack was our way to stay in touch with each other. There are several art tools that we use, but Photoshop was the primary one. And there are a few custom tools that Ron did that would help us take the art and then draw the walk boxes, the area that you could walk around, which is very similar to what we did in Maniac Mansion. We had a tool to do that also. And so some of the tools are homegrown. There's a tool called Slicey, which took images from a Photoshop file and created individual elements by the definition, and then we could use those into another thing for a texture map. It's mostly standard stuff, but for the text part, we just wrote, basically. And like Matthew said, because we weren't using Scum for this game. We used another language which was probably inspired by it, but not limited to what we did in Scum.
Squirrel.
Squirrel, yes. But the system on top of that was very similar to Scum in terms of commands that would the syntax was very similar, but not exactly the same. And so we often would be writing scripts and cutscenes, just on the screen and test them and see how it worked and adjust timings.
Okay. Thank you. And I just want to add that most of your work from the early days up to now, it's really become a cornerstone for everything that came after, because even if we had no proper access to, let's say, how Scum works, most of the tools that are available today for developing adventure games are mostly based on what we can get or what we know about those engines, those systems. So thank you very much, both of you, and all of you guys that are not here but are here in a way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Subito lì.
Sorry about that, but they gave me another idea, actually, for your question. I know that you guys licensed Scum to Humongous Games, right? The only licensed, Now, you build this fantastic tool, this fantastic, new script engine. So 2 question is, are you going to license it? Is there a chance? I don't know. Or why would you make such a nice system and build up such a, fantastic game without making a new one?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for the first part, of course, Scum was created by Ron. When he left LucasArts, he made an agreement that he could take the Scum system with him. As long as he maintained it, and maybe for a certain period of time, he would give them back additions or changes. And then at some point, I think that cut off. So he created, even though Lucasfilm or LucasArts owned it originally and paid for it, he still got access. So he was the one who started Humongous, and all those were his games. When Ron created the new system, I think I've heard him say at one point that he was considering putting it in public domain. I think he just thought about what that actually meant. And it's one thing to have a system which a bunch of people on this project can code in, but to make it bulletproof and fix all the issues that we knew about that we had to work around and then document it and maintain it and all that, I think I just don't want to do that. And it could change at some point, but at this point, I don't think he plans to. And as far as a future game, I don't know. I'm thinking that we really wanted to do this game as a one-off, and didn't want to get locked into doing point-and-click 1990s style graphic adventures for the rest of our lives. It was kind of fun to get the band back together again and do this, but not over and over and over again until we're 120.
Just another time, it's fine.
Yeah.
Not over and over. Just another one, it would be just perfect.
Well, yeah, I said maybe in 30 years we'll do another.
25 or something.
25
we have
years,
to wait.
yeah.
Well, we are waiting for it. And,
Okay. I think those of us who worked on the project, had a very similar experience to the experience that Matthew and I had, where it was just a great team to work with, and we loved the game, and we were all very dedicated to it. And so from that point of view, I think we'd all jump at the chance to work together on a project. But whether that happens or whether we have the energy to pour another 3 years into something, like that, I don't know yet. I think we're still recovering from the last part.
yeah, but my first question was actually about releasing it to public or license it, because if you don't want to do that, maybe there's somebody else that...
Yeah,
Well, that's my point.
You should
got
ask.
my point.
You should ask Ron.
Yeah, exactly.
It's his.
Okay, thank you.
Domande? Vedo una domanda da dietro, dall'ombra. Sì, l'ho vista bene. No, non si sente?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for being here. And talking about music, did you find immediately the main theme of Zak McKracken? Because it fits perfectly, in my opinion, in the game. Or did you have even other ideas of...
Grazie. It was not the first idea. I think I brought at least 2 or 3 previous ideas to David and the group we were working with that were rejected. For the version I brought in, it was right, and we knew it, and it fit perfectly the mood of the game and sort of had that excitement to get you ready to play it. And I've been completely honored. There are dozens and dozens of cover versions of that piece of music. And I've written a lot of other music in my life, but that one from 30 years ago is still the one that anybody knows.
Do you still have the rejected demos?
Probably not. I actually might on some floppy disks. They were done with Mark of the Unicorn, a very early sequencing program. But they're probably in floppies down in my basement. But whether I could get them to play or not is highly unlikely.
Do you remember them?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
I remember. I remember Matthew coming to me and giving me these earlier ones, and I felt frustrated because I wanted to like them, but I didn't have the words to say what had to change. So it was kind of one of those things where, like, I don't think that's it. And not having the musical language to say it should be more this or more that to give you direction. So I think you were kind of probably shooting in the dark, hoping that you would hit something. And I don't think it took more than 2 or 3 tries to find it. And when you played this, it was
It did not take a long time. It did not take a long time, but it took plenty of time. And we were on a fairly tight schedule. So most of the other music I wrote for the game, I actually stole from classical composers, so there wouldn't be any complaints. There's bits of Holst from the Planets. There's bits of John Denver. I'm leaving on a jet plane in there, but don't tell anybody. And there was a lot of borrowing for all the rest of the score.
Well, but borrowing back in the day was very, very common. If you listen to the soundtrack to Doom, it's basically a Metallica album with slightly different notes.
It's true. It's true. So, and that's okay. And now they call it sampling, and they actually take the exact version and use it. So there you go.
Ci sono altre domande? Non abbiamo più domande, quindi direi che okay, we are basically wrapping it up, but slowly. Is there anything else you both want to tell us about this 30th anniversary of Zak?
Yeah, I have something. I said this yesterday to the talk I gave, which was that when we did the game, we were doing a game that we kind of figured would last for maybe 2 or 3 years, 4 years, kind of the life of the computers we were doing it on. Commodore 64, we figured was near the end of its lifetime. PC, DOS, yeah, maybe a little longer. But we knew how technology changed, that at some point there just wouldn't be anything around that you could play the game on. So all the games we did, we assumed were very ephemeral, very short-lived games, and it totally shocked me. I kind of moved out of the game business for 10, 15 years, and in 2004 I spoke in Oslo at a conference. It was the first time I'd really spoken at one since I was at Lucas, and was blown away when someone walked up to me with his Nokia phone with Zak on it, playing under a C64 emulator. And it was before smartphones, so it was like just a standard Nokia phone with a color screen and a little joystick on it. And to realize that people were actually going to be able to play the game, I never considered that you could easily emulate older computers and the new computers and have plenty of power left over. So that was mind-blowing to know that there's actually some level of the people who play them as long as they want to, that it's not going to go away. Figure like black and white films from the 1920s, you could still at least play them on current equipment, but I thought the games would go away. So that was a huge honor to realize that, wow, people actually still know the games. That was great. So we kind of meant for them to go away, though, so it's kind of a strange experience. And Matthew, you missed the autograph session. I walked in here after dinner, and all these people came up to me and asked me to sign everything they had saved from Zak. So I wish you were here. I could have you do that too. That was such a.
Well, you're welcome to forge my signature.
Yeah. Should have gotten a rubber stamp, Matthew.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. It was amazing to me that 10 years ago, my daughter is 16 now, but 10 years ago when she was about 6 years old, I bought a Commodore 64 off of eBay and hooked it all up and sat her down in front of Zak McKracken and expected, because of her experience as a young child in the early 2000s, to be bored after 5 minutes and she played the entire thing through with me and loved every minute of it. So it was very heartwarming to know that it could still engage somebody, and it's amazing that Daniel has made now 2 films to honor it, and that all of you have shown up to give us even more accolades. It's astonishing and humbling, and thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Grazie mille.
Well, bene, grazie a tutti, grazie a tutti per essere stati qua. Abbiamo veramente avuto dei giganti questa sera, è stato splendido sentirli parlare. Ringraziamo tutti quelli che hanno fatto succedere questa cosa, tra cui anche Daniele, la mia voce che sta sparendo, però del resto sono le 11. Daniele che ha realizzato il film, che di fatto è stato il motore che ha messo in moto tutto quello che ha generato questa serata, che per me è stata molto speciale. E appunto, prima che finisca la mia voce, definitivamente, vi saluto. Un altro grande applauso per David Fox e buonanotte a tutti.
Thank you, Fabio.
Grazie.